Soo Yeon's palm cracked through the air toward Nora's face and stopped a hair's breadth from impact, not because Soo Yeon pulled back, but because a small hand had locked around her wrist. Zuri, barely 3 years old, planted her tiny sneakers on the cold marble floor and glared up at the woman towering above her. The mansion went silent. A maid froze mid-step with a tray of champagne glasses tilting in her hands. Somewhere down the hall, a door that had been swinging shut stopped, held open by an unseen hand. "You can't order my mummy around." Soo Yeon yanked her wrist free, stunned into stillness. And that was the exact second the study doors opened. Jae-won stood in the doorway, having heard every single word. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 3 weeks earlier, Nora had walked through the service entrance of the Kim estate for the first time, a folded ursum in her hand, and a lie sitting comfortably behind her eyes. The paper said her name was Nora Adeyemi, 29, 3 years of domestic experience in Seoul. It did not say that her real surname belonged to a man who had once owned 4 cargo ships and a warehouse district in Lagos, a man whose company collapsed in 11 days 15 years ago under circumstances that were never fully explained to the family left behind. It did not say that the collapse had a name stitched quietly into old shipping ledgers, and that name was Kim. She had trained herself not to flinch at the size of the house. Marble floors that swallowed sound. A staff of 12 who moved like they'd rehearsed their own invisibility. And at the center of it, Jae-won young for the position he held. Colder in reputation than in person. Engaged in 3 weeks to Soo Yeon, daughter of an allied crime family, whose union with the Kims would seal a partnership worth more than either family could say out loud. Nora was given a small room near the kitchen, and told plainly that her daughter could stay with her as long as Zuri did not disturb the household. Zuri disturbed the household by the second day. She followed the head chef around asking why he cried when he cut onions. She told one of Jae-won's bodyguards, a man built like a wall, that his shoes squeaked like an angry mouse. And on the third evening, wandering from the kitchen, while Nora's back was turned for exactly 40 seconds, she pushed open the door to the study and found Jae-won sitting alone at his desk, staring at nothing. "Why you look sad?" Zuri asked him. Jae-won looked up, startled that a child had gotten past 3 layers of security to ask him something no one else in the building had dared to ask in years. "I'm not sad," he said. "You look sad," Zuri insisted, climbing uninvited into the chair across from him. "My mummy say when you look sad and say you not sad, you double sad." He should have called for someone to remove her. Instead, he found himself 20 minutes later explaining badly to a toddler why running an organization meant eating dinner alone most nights. Nora found them like that, and the apology died in her throat. When she saw the look on his face, something loosened in it that she hadn't seen since she arrived. "I'm sorry, sir," she said instead. "She wasn't supposed to." "She's fine," Jae-won said too quickly. "She can come back." Nora didn't understand yet how dangerous those 4 words were going to become. From that evening on, Zuri treated the study as her personal territory. She would knock a habit Nora had drilled into her since birth, and then walk in without waiting for an answer, climbing onto the same chair, swinging her legs because they didn't reach the floor, narrating whatever opinion she'd formed that day about the household. "The chef man cried again," she announced one evening. "I told him onion is not that sad." "What did he say?" Jae-won asked, not looking up from a ledger he'd stopped actually reading 3 minutes earlier. "He say some things make you cry even when they not that sad, like the onion is not the real reason." Zuri considered this with the seriousness only a toddler can bring to a stranger's grief. "Is that true for you too?" Jae-won set the pen down. "What do you mean?" "You still look sad sometimes, even when you say you not." He didn't answer for a long moment, and when he did, his voice had none of the practiced calm he used with his lieutenants. I lost my brother a long time ago. Sometimes it still feels like today. What was his name? Chidi-hoon. Zuri repeated it slowly, tasting the unfamiliar syllables. That's a nice name. You can be sad about him. My mummy say sad don't mean weak, it mean you loved something real. Jae-won looked at this small, fearless girl repeating her mother's wisdom back to a man 3 decades older than her, and felt something crack open in his chest that he didn't have language for yet. He would think about that sentence again, weeks later, standing in a ballroom that had just learned exactly how real his love for this family had become. Nora, watching from the doorway more evenings than she wanted to admit, began to understand that the danger she'd walked into wasn't only the danger of being discovered. It was the danger of wanting to stay. She tried, for a while, to keep her distance from Jae-won directly, speaking to him only when household matters required it, keeping her eyes down the way she'd trained herself to since childhood, when survival meant being unremarkable. It didn't work. He found reasons to be in the kitchen when she was cooking Zuri's dinner. He asked once, haltingly, whether the lullabies she sang were Igbo, and when she said yes, he asked her to teach him one line, badly mangling the pronunciation until Zuri collapsed into laughter, loud enough to bring a guard to the doorway to check on them. "You're terrible at this," Nora told him, laughing despite herself for the first time since she'd arrived in this house. "I'm terrible at most things that don't involve running an organization," he admitted. "It's a narrow skill set. That's a sad way to live. I'm working on it," he said, and looked at her in a way that made the sentence mean more than it should have. She reminded herself, that night and every night after, why she had come here. But the reminder grew quieter each time she said it, and the silence that replaced it sounded, uncomfortably, like hope. Soo-yeon noticed the shift before Jae-won did. She noticed it in the small things, the way he mentioned the maid's daughter twice at a dinner where he used to say nothing at all, the way his eyes went to the doorway when he heard a child's footsteps in the hall. Soo-yeon had spent her whole life being trained to notice small things. It was, in some ways, the only skill her family had ever properly invested in her. She said nothing about it. Not yet. She had her own small things to hide. The first time it happened, she thought it was nothing, a phone that wasn't her usual phone, buzzing in the bottom of her clutch during a dinner with Jae-won's lieutenants. She excused herself, walked to the terrace, and answered in a clipped, careful voice that dropped into a language none of the staff around her understood. "I told you I need more time," she said. The voice on the other end was patient in the way that only powerful people can afford to be patient. "You've had 3 weeks. The wedding is in 2 months. After that, you're inside the family permanently, and permanent is much harder to extract information from than engaged. I understand the timeline. Do you understand what happens if you don't deliver?" Soo-yeon looked back through the glass doors at Jae-won, laughing at something one of his men said, unaware that the woman he was about to marry was standing 12 feet away negotiating the terms of his downfall. "I understand," she said, and hung up. She had not chosen this. That was the part no one back home cared to hear. Her family owed a debt so large it had stopped being measured in money and started being measured in obligation, and the rival syndicate holding that debt had made her the price of interest. Marry into the Kims. Report back. Simple, they called it. Nothing was simple about smiling at a man every day while quietly hollowing out his house from the inside. She remembered the conversation with her father 3 months earlier, the one that had sealed this arrangement without ever technically asking her permission. He had sat her down in his study, poured 2 glasses of something expensive, and told her, in the gentle voice he reserved for delivering unbearable news, that the family's survival depended on this marriage. "You make it sound like I have a choice," she'd said. "You have the choice of how you carry it," he'd replied. "Some daughters would resent us for this. I'm hoping you understand it instead." Understanding and resenting aren't opposites. Appa, he hadn't argued with that. He'd simply refilled her glass and told her the wedding date had already been discussed with the Kim family, as if her understanding had been assumed the entire time. Standing on that terrace weeks later, phone pressed to her ear, negotiating the terms of a betrayal she never wanted to commit, Soo Yeon thought about that conversation more often than she let herself admit. It didn't make what she was doing forgivable. It only made it explainable. And explainable was the only comfort she had left to hold on to most nights. Over the following 2 weeks, the household rearranged itself around a child no one had planned for. Zuri learned the names of every guard. She insisted on saying goodnight to the security cameras, waving at them as if the men behind the monitors could see her, which, increasingly, they could, because more than one guard had started leaving that particular feed up a little longer than necessary, just to watch her wave. Nora watched all of it with a hollow feeling she couldn't name. She had come here to find proof, not to fall into something that felt, against every instinct she owned, like belonging. At night, after Zuri was asleep, she pulled a folded newspaper clipping from the lining of her suitcase her father's shipping company. Front page, the collapse. The word irregularities printed in a font too small to hold the weight of what it had actually done to their family. And beneath it, a name circled in red ink that had haunted her for 15 years. Kim Holdings, listed as a silent partner in the Port Authority contract that had been quietly revoked from her father the week before everything fell apart. She didn't know yet whether Jae-won had any part in what happened. He would have been a teenager when it happened. But someone in this house had ordered it, or known about it, or profited from it, and she intended to find out who before she let herself feel anything at all for the people living inside these walls. It was too late. She already did. The confrontation on the marble floor, the one that opened this story, happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. And it happened because of something small that became large the way small things always do in houses full of people guarding secrets. Zuri had wandered into the front hall while Soo Yeon was on the phone with a wedding planner, arguing over floral arrangements in a tone sharper than the topic deserved. Zuri, bored and unbothered by hierarchy, tugged on the hem of Soo Yeon's dress and asked her a question about the flowers. "Not now," Soo Yeon snapped, not even looking down. Zuri, undeterred, tugged again. "But I want to help pick," I said, "not now." Soo Yeon's voice cracked with 3 weeks of pressure that had nothing to do with a toddler and everything to do with a debt she couldn't outrun. And her hand came up before she fully decided to raise it, not a slap she'd have delivered with full force, but a flinch-turned motion, aimed at a child who had simply asked to help pick flowers. And then Zuri's hand was around her wrist, and Jae-won was in the doorway, and the entire house held its breath. If you're still watching up to now, type "I'm enjoying it" in the comment section. "Explain," Jae-won said. Just that. Soo Yeon's composure reassembled itself fast, the way it always did. She grabbed my dress. I reacted. Nothing happened. Something almost happened, Jae-won said, and his voice had gone very quiet, which everyone in the house knew was worse than shouting. Nora appeared then, having heard the commotion from the kitchen, and scooped Zuri up before anything else could be said, murmuring apologies she didn't fully believe were necessary. Jae-won's eyes followed the two of them down the hall longer than protocol allowed. That night, Soo Yeon did something she'd been circling for 2 weeks and hadn't let herself finish. She paid a man to look into the new maid. It took him 4 days. What came back wasn't much a Ursum with employment history that didn't check out, a previous address that led to a demolished building in Lagos, and, buried under an old registration filing, a name that didn't match the one on file. Adeyemi was invented. The real surname belonged to a shipping family that had gone bankrupt 15 years ago, in a collapse everyone in certain circles knew had been engineered. Soo Yeon sat with the folder for a long time before she understood what she was holding. Not proof of an affair. Proof of a spy or something close enough to one that it didn't matter which word was technically correct. And a spy, unlike a fiancé with an inconvenient debt, was something Jae-won would have removed from the house within the hour. No questions, no mercy. if Soo-yeon simply handed him the folder. She almost did it that night. She stood outside his study with the folder in her hand for 11 minutes before she made a different decision, one that would let her keep both her leverage and her secret intact. She went to Nora instead. "I know who you are," Soo-yeon said, closing the door to Nora's small room behind her. "I know your real name. I know about the shipping company. I know you didn't come here to fold laundry." Nora's blood went cold, but she kept her face still, a skill she'd practiced for 15 years. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't," Soo-yeon said, almost gently, which was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. "I have a folder. I have a man who confirms every part of it. If I give this to Jae-won tonight, you and your daughter are out of this house by morning, and depending on his mood, out of the country entirely. Or worse. Then why haven't you?" Soo-yeon's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Because I have my own reasons for wanting this engagement to survive the next 2 months, and a scandal involving a spy in the household is not good for anyone's timeline. So here's what happens. You disappear. Quietly, resign. Take the girl. Leave a note about a sick relative. Whatever story you want. You have until the end of the week." Nora's hands were shaking, but her voice didn't. "And if I don't? Then I stop protecting a secret that isn't mine to protect, and you find out exactly how far Jae-won's mercy extends to people who lie to him." Soo-yeon opened the door to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, your daughter is a sweet child. It would be a shame for her first real memory of this house to be men walking her mother out of it." The door closed. Nora sat on the edge of the narrow bed, listening to Zuri breathe in the small cot beside her, and understood that the 15-year search for the truth about her father was about to cost her the one thing she hadn't expected to find along the way. She began packing that same night. She got as far as folding Zuri's third shirt into a duffel bag when the door opened without a knock, and Jae-won was standing there, and one look at the half-packed bag told him everything he needed to know except the reason. "Where are you going?" he said. Not a question. A demand dressed as one. "Somewhere else," Nora said, not turning around. "It's better this way." "Better for who?" "For everyone." Her voice cracked on the second word, and she hated it. Hated that 15 years of controlled grief had never once broken her voice, and 3 weeks in this house had done it in a sentence. Jae-won crossed the room and took the shirt out of her hands before she could fold it. "Tell me the truth. All of it. Right now. Or I have you stopped at the gate and you tell me there instead, and I promise you that conversation goes worse." So she told him. The shipping company. Her father's name, the real one, spoken out loud in this house for the first time. The collapse. The silent partner listed on a contract that had been pulled a week before everything fell apart. Kim Holdings, circled in red ink for 15 years. Jae-won didn't move for a long moment. "My father ran this organization before me," he said finally, quietly. "I was 16 when the port contracts happened. I didn't know the details. I'm not going to pretend I didn't benefit from decisions made before I could vote. But I swear to you, on everything I have, I didn't know your father's name until this moment. That doesn't undo what happened to him." "No," Jae-won agreed. "It doesn't. But it means I can help you find out the truth instead of being the reason you have to hide from it." It was in that same conversation, in the low light of a half-packed room, that Jae-won noticed something he'd registered a dozen times without letting it register, a small crescent-shaped birthmark on the inside of Zuri's wrist, visible as she slept curled in her cot. He'd seen that exact mark once before, on a hand much larger than hers, belonging to a half-brother the family had buried, in every sense of the word, 12 years ago after a war between syndicates that Jae-won's father had never fully explained. "Who is her father?" Jae-won asked, and something in his voice had changed entirely. Nora hesitated. "His name was Chidi. Half Nigerian, half Korean. He never told me his full family history. He said it was dangerous to know. He disappeared before Zuri was born. I assumed he was dead. Jae-won sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, staring at the sleeping child as if seeing her for the first time. His full name, he said. Was it Kim Chidi-hoon? Nora's breath caught. How do you know that? Because he was my brother, Jae-won said. Half-brother. My father disowned him, told everyone he died in the war with the Eastern Syndicate 12 years ago. I was told the same thing. I mourned him. He looked up at Nora with an expression she'd never seen on him before, something between grief and disbelief and a fierce, sudden protectiveness. She isn't just the maid's daughter. She's blood. She's a Kim heir, whether anyone in this house is ready for that or not. The unpacked duffel bag sat between them, suddenly absurd, a small monument to how much had changed in 20 minutes. News like that does not stay contained in a house full of people trained to listen at doors. Soo-yeon learned of the bloodline discovery within a day, and it detonated every plan she'd been quietly assembling. Adina confirmed Heir was not a scandal she could bury or leverage. It was a threat to the entire structure of the merger her family had built the engagement around. If Zuri was recognized publicly, inheritance lines shifted, alliances shifted, and the debt her family owed the rival syndicate became exponentially harder to settle through marriage alone. She made a call she'd been avoiding. There's a complication, she said. Handle it, the voice on the other end replied. Or, we handle it for you, and you won't like our methods. It's not that simple. There's a child involved, a verified bloodline. A pause, then the child becomes the priority. Remove the mother and daughter before the engagement gala. Quietly, make it look like Nora chose to leave. If Jae-won suspects foul play, the whole arrangement collapses anyway, so it needs to look voluntary. Soo-yeon closed her eyes. She had spent 3 weeks telling herself she was only protecting her family's survival. She had not yet had to say out loud that surviving now meant erasing a child. I need more time to plan it properly. You have until the gala. 5 days. The 5 days that followed moved like a held breath. Jae-won brought in a lawyer under strict confidence to formalize Zuri's bloodline claim, working quietly enough that Soo-yeon's family wouldn't have official grounds to contest it before the gala. Nora, for the first time in 15 years, let herself imagine a version of her life that wasn't built entirely around a 15-year-old, grudge a version where Zuri grew up known, protected, claimed by people who wanted her, rather than merely tolerated her. But grief and gratitude do not erase danger. So Yeon's men, 3 of them, quiet, professional, unaffiliated with the household staff and therefore untraceable to her directly, were briefed on the extraction 2 nights before the gala. The plan was simple in the way that plans always sound simple on paper during the gala's chaos. While every guard's attention was split between 300 guests and a security perimeter stretched thin, Nora and Zuri would be removed from a side entrance under the guise of a family emergency, driven out of the city. And the household would be told, days later, that Nora had simply chosen to leave with her daughter rather than face the complications of a contested inheritance. Jae-won noticed something was wrong before he could name it. He noticed that Soo-yeon had stopped arguing about wedding details entirely, gone eerily agreeable in a way that didn't match 3 weeks of visible strain. He noticed that 2 of his most trusted lieutenants mentioned, almost in passing, unfamiliar security personnel added to the gala roster at Soo-yeon's request. He noticed, most of all, the way she avoided being in the same room as Zuri now, as if she couldn't look at the child without seeing the plan she'd agreed to. He said nothing yet. He watched, and he waited, and he quietly rerouted 2 of his own men to shadow the side entrances she'd requested extra staffing for. 2 nights before the gala, unable to sleep, he found himself back in the study where all of this had started, and Nora found him there, the way she had that very first evening, except now it was him sitting alone in the dark and her standing in the doorway. "You should be resting," she said. "Big night coming. I keep thinking about something Zuri said to me. That sad, doesn't mean weak. It means you loved something real. He looked up at her. I think I'm afraid of losing something before I've even let myself call it what it is. Nora crossed the room slowly and sat in the chair across from him, the same chair Zuri had claimed as her own weeks earlier. Say it then. Whatever it is you're afraid of naming. I don't want you to leave this house. Either of you. Not because of the bloodline. Not because of the shipping company. Not because of anything except that this place has felt less empty since you arrived, and I don't know how to go back to before. J1, I'm not asking you to answer tonight, he said quickly. I'm asking you to survive the gala first. Whatever Su Yeon is planning, I need you both close to me, not hidden away pretending nothing's wrong. Nora reached across the space between them and took his hand, and for a moment neither of them said anything else, because some things didn't need the extra weight of language once they'd already been understood. Then I'll stay close, she said. For Zuri, for the truth. And maybe, if we survive this, for something else too. He held on to that sentence the entire next day, turning it over like a promise he intended to keep, even as Su Yeon's men finalized the details of a plan built to take it away from him before he ever got the chance. The night of the gala arrived dressed in silk and gold light, 300 guests from allied families filling the ballroom, champagne circulating, a string quartet playing something too elegant for the amount of tension humming beneath it. Nora stood near the edge of the room in a dress that felt borrowed even though it had been given to her, watching Zuri twirl in a small matching gown, unaware that she was, in this room full of powerful strangers, both the most protected and the most hunted person present. Su Yeon crossed the ballroom floor with a smile fixed carefully in place, and leaned close to Nora under the pretense of admiring Zuri's dress. It's time, she murmured. There's a car waiting at the east entrance. Go now, quietly, and no one gets hurt. Fight it, and I promise you it gets worse for both of you. Nora's blood went cold for the second time in 2 weeks, and this time there was no folder to negotiate with, no packed bag to buy her a night's grace. You're really doing this, in front of everyone. I'm doing this because of everyone, Su Yeon said. You don't understand what's at stake for my family. This was never personal. She's 3 years old, Nora said, and for the first time her voice wasn't controlled at all. How is any of this not personal to her? The two of them stood locked in that moment, a held breath in the middle of a room full of noise, and it was Zuri sharp-eyed, unbothered by adult subtlety the way 3-year-olds always are who broke it, tugging on Su Yeon's sleeve exactly the way she had weeks earlier. Why you talking mad-faced to my mummy again? The room around them didn't stop. But J1, 20 feet away in conversation with an allied family head, felt the shift the way he'd learned to feel every shift in this house, and turned in time to see Su Yeon's men beginning to move toward the east entrance, positioning themselves too carefully, too deliberately for a gala with no expected trouble. He crossed the ballroom floor faster than protocol allowed for a host, and reached Nora's side just as one of Su Yeon's men reached for Zuri's hand under the guise of leading her to a surprise. Summarize what comes next carefully, because everything after this moment happens in the space of 90 seconds and changes the entire household forever. J1 caught the man's wrist before it closed around Zuri's small hand and, in a voice pitched to carry across the ballroom without shouting, said the words that ended the engagement in front of every ally his family had. Get your hands off my niece. The word landed like a struck bell. Conversations died mid-sentence. The string quartet faltered and stopped. 300 guests turned toward the center of the room where the head of the Kim organization stood between his fiancée's men and a maid's daughter he had just publicly claimed as blood. J1 Su Yeon started, her composure cracking for the first time in 3 weeks in front of witnesses who mattered. I know everything, he said, quiet enough now that only those closest could hear, but the silence in the room carried it anyway. I know about the calls to your family's rivals. I know about the information you've been feeding out of this house since the engagement began. I know you paid a man to dig up Nora's identity and used it to threaten her instead of bringing it to me, because exposing her honestly would have exposed you too. And I know exactly what your men were about to do at that east entrance tonight. Soo Yeon's family patriarch, seated at the head table 20 feet away, rose slowly, his face draining of color as 300 guests turned to look at him next. "This is a misunderstanding that can be resolved privately," he said. "Too loud, too fast. The way men say things when they already know it's too late. There's nothing private left to resolve," J1 said. "Your daughter compromised this house from the inside for a debt that was never mine to pay. And tonight she gave the order to remove a child, my brother's daughter, from a gala in front of 300 witnesses, because that child's existence threatened the deal you built on my family's back." The room erupted into the particular kind of controlled chaos that only happens among people trained never to show panic in public, quiet, urgent conversations breaking out at every table. Allied families recalculating loyalties in real time. Security details on both sides tensing without yet moving. Soo Yeon's men, caught between an order from a woman whose authority had just evaporated and the obvious fact that they were now surrounded, stepped back from Zuri without needing to be told twice. Soo Yeon stood alone in the space that opened around her. The folder she'd used as leverage for 2 weeks now worthless. The debt her family owed no longer solvable through a marriage that had just ended in front of every witness who mattered. "You don't understand what they'll do to my family now," she said. And for the first time it wasn't a threat. It was fear. "You should have thought about that before you decided a 3-year-old was an acceptable price," J1 said. He didn't raise his voice again. He didn't need to. He knelt down instead, in front of the entire ballroom, and picked Zuri up, and she wrapped her arms around his neck without any understanding of what had just happened. Only that the sad-looking man from the study didn't look sad right now. He looked like something else. Something she didn't have a word for yet, but would remember for the rest of her life as the moment everything in the house became safe. Nora stood beside them both, shaking, and J1 reached out and took her hand in front of everyone, in front of every ally, every enemy, every witness who would carry this story back to their own families by morning. "She's not the maid," he said to no one and everyone at once. "She's family. Both of them are." Soo Yeon's family left the gala within the hour, the alliance severed publicly and completely. The debt that had driven her into this position now a problem entirely her own to survive without the shield of a Kim marriage to hide behind. What happened to her family in the weeks that followed became a different story entirely, one whispered about in rooms Nora and Zuri would never have to enter again. In the days after the gala, the household settled into a rhythm no one had dared imagine 3 weeks earlier. Lawyers finalized what the DINA results had already confirmed, and Zuri's name was entered formally into a family record book that had, until then, only ever listed the names of people powerful enough to be feared. Nora watched the ink dry on that page and thought of her father, of the red circle around a company name that had haunted her for 15 years, and understood that the truth she'd come here to find had led her somewhere she never expected, not toward revenge, but toward a family willing to help her finish what her father never got the chance to. "We're going to find out exactly what happened to your father's company," J1 told her one evening, spreading old shipping ledgers across the same desk where Zuri had once climbed uninvited into his grief. "Whoever ordered it, whoever profited, they answer for it. That's not charity. That's what's owed. You don't have to do that for me. I'm not doing it for you," he said, and softened it with something close to a smile. "I'm doing it for Zuri's grandfather, whose name deserves better than a footnote in someone else's ledger. And yes, also for you." Zuri, unaware of ledgers or debts or the particular gravity of the moment, chose that exact instant to climb into the chair between them and declare that she was hungry. And the room dissolved into laughter that felt, for the first time in either adult's memory, entirely uncomplicated. Guards who once watched her only through security monitors now let her walk the perimeter with them in the mornings, small hand tucked into a much larger one, narrating opinions about the weather and the gate and the particular squeak of a specific pair of shoes. The chef stopped crying over onions quite so dramatically. mostly because Zuri had taken to standing on a stool beside him, offering unsolicited commentary that made the crying feel far less private. And Nora, who had spent 15 years training herself never to want more than survival, found herself, on quiet evenings, allowing herself to want exactly that more. A life not built around a grudge. A daughter who would grow up knowing both halves of where she came from. A man who looked at her like something worth protecting, rather than something to be managed. And on the nights when the house finally went quiet, when Zuri was asleep and the guards had settled into their rounds, Nora let herself believe, fully and without flinching, that the hardest chapter of her story had already been survived. The last CTA, before we close, deserves its own honest moment. This story was never really about a mafia empire or a broken engagement. It was about a mother who refused to disappear quietly, even when disappearing was offered to her as the safer choice. And about a child too young to understand danger who, somehow, without meaning to, kept saving the people around her simply by telling the truth out loud when the adults in the room had all learned to whisper. The lesson sitting underneath all of it is simple. The truth you're afraid to speak out loud is usually the exact thing that sets you free. And the people worth keeping in your life are the ones who choose you even after they learn everything you tried to hide. Family, this story taught us, isn't always the blood you're born into. Sometimes it's the people who stand between you and the door when everyone else is telling you to walk through it quietly. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. We appreciate every single one of you who stayed with Nora, Zuri, and Jay one through every twist tonight. Tell us in the comments what part of this story you enjoyed the most, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you never miss what's coming next.